Hi, I'm Devin, and I'm going to give a quick tour of some of the features of Muzak Pro. So, getting started with Muzak Pro is pretty much the same as getting started with Muzak. Here in your mix file, you're going to want to add Muzak to run in the test environment in the preferred CLI env key here in your project. And then you're also going to add Muzak as a dependency. However, this time Muzak Pro comes from this Git server. So there's a private Git server, and when you subscribe, you will get your own username and password. Of course, you don't have to put the username and password in the URL like this, but for now, I just did that. So then you get your dependencies with mix.deps.get. And after that's done, there's actually one more step with Muzak Pro. Is the first time you add it to your project, you're going to want to run mix muzak.gen.config. And this is going to create your .muzak.exs configuration file for you. And there's going to be some nice defaults in there for a lot of the configuration. And we're going to do a quick tour of that. But first, I'm just going to actually get us kicked off by doing mix muzak mutations 1. So we just run one mutation. Make sure it's running and working just fine. It will compile, and then it will run a single mutation for us, a single random mutation. Great. Okay, so it survived, or it was found. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start another run. This run will take a little bit, but I'm going to do mix muzak, and I'm going to use profile CI. So in our configuration, we have some, in muzak.exs, we have these configuration profiles. So that .mix.exs file that we generated will, by default, create two profiles. The default profile, which is the simplest one. In here, you can configure how many nodes you're using to run your test. If you want, you can run it on multiple nodes that Muzak will spawn and cluster for you and evenly distribute the work across those nodes. You can get a little bit of a speed up there, depending on the application, depending on a lot of things, sometimes up to 20-30% faster running on 2 or 3 nodes. Usually anything more than 3 will actually start to slow things down as you start dealing with too much context switching on the CPU level. But if you want to do 2 or 3 nodes, you can. There's a bit of configuration involved with that, additional configuration, which you can read about in the documentation if you're interested. Then the next thing we have is this mutation filter. This is going to mutate or decide which files and which lines in which files are mutated. So we can say that we're only going to apply mutations to these files and then to these specific lines in these files if we want. By default, we just make sure that we're getting rid of anything in test and that we're only mutating Elixir files, so something that ends with .ex, and that we're going to do the whole file. And then we also have a way to filter the test files themselves. So if you want to filter them out or order them in any specific way, this is actually something that's going to be included as a feature in Muzak Pro later on. We're going to hook into cover, and we're going to try and make ways to basically front load the tests that are most likely to cause a failure so that hopefully you can run your mutation testing as fast as possible. But as we saw earlier, we're dealing with the CI profile. So this is a great thing for using in your CI environment. It runs as a single node, and by default what it does is it will basically find which lines in which files have changed from the current commit to the last commit by a different author. I did this so that it works for teams that are both merging using merge commits, or teams that are doing rebases or squash and rebase or squash and merge, anything like that. It's imperfect, but luckily, because the configuration is just a function, every team can configure it and modify it in whichever way suits them. And then again, for the test file filter right now, there's nothing by default, but if your team wants to, for example, run the integration tests last, whatever that is for your team, you can do that here, and that will hopefully give you a fair amount of speed up. And what we did previously over here that we see is right now we're only running on the stuff that has changed since the last commit by a different author. Running this in CI is a great way for someone to get feedback on the work that they're currently doing. So if I'm working on writing a new feature, if I get to CI and I see that I have a failure in Muzak, then that'll tell me before anyone reviews my code that I might want to write another test. So we can see here that we have something where if I completely change this key, this key in this keyword list to something totally different, we don't generate a failing test, which shows me that if I were to open this, I could see a bit more about what's going on, and then I, as a developer, can decide what to do about it. So 107. So I can see here that, okay, we're raising an exception and I'm giving it a message. So if I can change this, then I might not be testing this case where I'm raising, or I might not be asserting against the message. Either way, it gives me good feedback relatively quickly that I might want to go and take a look at something a little bit deeper. There are also a lot more mutators in Muzak Pro than in regular Muzak. There are great Elixir specific mutators, things like adding and removing pins from pattern matches, because that's one really subtle way to introduce bugs into applications, and so hopefully this will help us find those. Things like changing the orders of clauses in case statements, things like changing the orders of function heads when you're pattern matching in function heads, again, to just try and do whatever we can to break this application and to make sure that hopefully our tests are covering those cases. And that's my quick look at some of the features of Muzak Pro. If you're interested or if you have any questions, you can definitely reach out to me. I'm always happy to talk. I hope everyone enjoyed.